is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. When we talk about student data, attendance reports, test scores, and parent portals probably come to mind. But a growing number of school systems are investing in complex digital platforms intended to improve both instruction and student outcomes. Jenny Abamu has been covering this issue for EdSurge, and she's here to discuss a new series co-produced with the Hechinger Report. Jenny, welcome to EWA Radio.
Thank you for having me, Emily. I'm very excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So why did you want to tackle this topic?
I was looking through a jobs board. I'm always looking for places where things are happening differently. And the jobs board is a really good place to kind of signal that. So if you're looking at what new positions or people are hiring for, that's a really good place to signal and kind of give you insight as to what people are doing that they're not telling you about. So I was kind of story scooping and I was looking at the jobs board and I noticed that there were a lot of applications for data scientists. And I thought that's really, weird to have, school job boards be full of jobs for data scientists. Normally you're thinking it's going to be teachers or something like that. But there were so many data scientist positions that were opening up in different schools.
Looking at those job boards led you to a charter school network called New Visions. Tell us a little bit about them.
They've been in New York City for a while. Initially, they kind of formulated themselves to help with professional development in schools. So they're kind of like an arm to help out. While they work with New York City schools still, they also started to build their own charter schools. Now they run several charter schools in the district, and they've had mixed reports on their work. So if you go and look at other people who have covered New Visions in different ways, you'll see kind of mixed reports as far as how successful the networks have been or what's going on with the networks. They do quite a few different things too. So they also now have this data lab that they're doing, and they build out tools in partnership with Google. But their main job initially was helping New York City schools with professional development. And that's kind of the crux of their work. But I think that the charter networks have actually probably ended up getting them more finances in the long run.
So you see that New Visions has these job openings. It looks like it might be a story. You reached out to them. Were they delighted to hear from you or a little surprised?
I reached out to them several times. I called, I sent emails, and I guess when they saw I was going to keep harassing them, they eventually got back to me. And at that point, we had a few phone calls before they finally let me in.
One of the big buzzwords in education right now is personalized learning, which is tailoring instruction to an individual student's needs. And obviously to do that, you've got to have data on how they're performing. But those two things aren't the same thing, are they? And that was a point that Mark Dunitz, the president of New Visions Charter Network, really wanted to get across in your story, didn't he?
A lot of people assume that every single data story happens to be around that. But the reality is a lot of schools are using data that are not using personalized learning. So for example, particularly with New Visions, when I interviewed Mark, when I asked him even just kind of, is he going to do this personalized learning thing? Is this a direction that he wants to go? He was really reluctant to even acknowledge that that was something that he was interested in at all. He did not see data collection and the act of enacting data in schools as something that gets between the teacher and the student. He wanted this to be something that happens on the back end. So his project and his work in New Visions with data is all about back end administrative work, all about fixing the schools on the outside, very close to what Eva Moskowitz has said in the past as well, who's from Success Academy in New York City, that they really believe that teaching and learning is a very human endeavor and technology is important, but it should not inhibit a teacher from being able to interact with their kids. When you listen to people talk about personalized learning, that's kind of seen as, the teacher becomes a facilitator in the classroom or a coach in the classroom, and they're kind of on the sideline taking a back seat sometimes. That's why some educators have rejected it in some places. And they've said, this is not what I want for my school. I want my teachers and my students to be very close. And so where technology can come in and help our schools is more on the administrative end, on the back end, doing things like helping us make sure that we're functional, helping sure that we're making sure that kids are graduating on time, not missing certain things. And that's kind of more of Mark's project with the data.
Sometimes the decisions by districts to ramp up their student data collection is driven by federal policy. For example, No Child Left Behind required states for the first time to track student achievement by ethnic subgroups. What are some of the data expectations embedded in the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, which replaced No Child Left Behind?
First of all, as we all know, with ESSA, there are different expectations when it comes to data and what data you're collecting. But a few interesting data points that most people should have, whether local or state, is this idea of college readiness. So you're tracking, for example, students who are able to go into college. Also, sometimes you're tracking students who are going into remedial courses when they enter college. So you kind of can tell if a school is properly preparing kids to be ready for college. So college readiness is an indicator that I didn't necessarily see calculated before. And now it's being calculated in a lot of districts on their portals and being made publicly available. And also the publicly available component and the way that they've designed it was really interesting. Most districts, what they were supposed to do was to meet up with parents and have parents also tell them what indicators they needed to see in order for them to feel confidence or to feel like they knew their district or to hold the district accountable in different ways. And so they were supposed to have those meetings with parents. And that was part of the ESSA guidelines for them to meet with them and then also use those meetings to help design the report cards, to help design the public information and the data that's available to them. And that has resulted in a lot of different data that's being collected. Parents ask a lot of different questions that you might not think about, that they are actually actively thinking about, that they want to be made publicly available. Now, how those things are actually calculated and end up looking in the portals seem to be very different than sometimes what the parents initially thought it would be. At least from the interactions that I've heard, but even just looking at the way they're calculated and displayed through ESSA and what the requirements have been are really interesting.
We're talking with Jenny Abamu of EdSurge about her reporting on student data, transparency, and accountability. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and your feedback will help us grow. Jenny, I thought you were really smart to organize this series, sort of starting at 30,000 feet and working your way down. You look at the district level applications of some of this data. You look at the classroom level and also how this is impacting family and parents. Your second story focused on Washington, D.C. Did you see anything in those classrooms you hadn't seen before?
Well, the interesting thing about the schools that I went to in DC and how they're implementing data, the idea with it being to help teachers and students in the classroom, so teachers to be able to learn where students are behind and to keep them, differentiate instruction, and students for themselves to be able to set their own learning goals and become self-directed learners, as a lot of the personalized learning rhetoric kind of insinuates. Those are kind of the applications of data, but the idea is a lot of it is resource-based. And that's really important. So when I go to different schools and I've seen them kind of try to apply different data to the way the schools and students are enacting that on a daily basis, that looks really different depending on the resources in the schools. If you don't have enough money as a district to buy one-to-one computers or to even upkeep the data, a lot of places, especially in Detroit, where that data, like even the superintendent himself kind of mentioned that he did not trust the data that was in his district because it's not being input properly, so he can't even make decisions on it. And so there's a lot of layers to using data in schools that people kind of have to look into. And so when I was looking at districts trickling down to classrooms, at least, there's so much diversity in it. And it really depends on how much the school really cares about it on an entire school level, how good that data is going to be.
We know that parents are a critical component of a student's academic success, but data is only useful to them if they can find it and understand it. You focused on a community partnership in Oakland that's looking to improve parental engagement. Tell us a little bit more about that.
The Oakland community was so interesting to me because they had a few leaders who really knew the power of data and accountability. The building that I actually went to, it's a very grassroots organization type of building. Actually, I think that the history behind that building that they were even meeting in was where Black Panthers used to meet. And it's a very, kind of rundown, poor part of Oakland. And you go in and they're literally knocking on doors, taking data sets to people to show them what the data sets look like in their children's schools so that they're able to have a response or reaction, because most parents don't even know to look for it, right? So many of them don't even know that the public data is available. And when they even do know what is available, they don't know how to respond to it, or they don't know whether they're empowered to respond to it or even do something about it. And I thought the really interesting part about that was a lot of people kind of assume that giving parents data about schools helps them only pick schools. But I think that that's also misguided in the sense that most people can't move from the schools that they are in, even if they want to pick schools. If you want to go to a different charter school or something, that charter school might be too full. One of the characters in the story, his daughter was 126 on the waiting list, right? So he can't just move his daughter to a charter school that has better performance. And so what the other option of using that data can be is to hold those school districts that you have accountable. So if someone says, hey, vote for me as superintendent and I'll raise reading scores or I'll raise math scores, well, you don't know if he's actually doing that unless you got data. And so if you're able to kind of see that data and then see, okay, the math scores did go up because the superintendent implemented these policies, or a lot of parents were also saying they're on boards in the school district, so they're able to vote on, for example, budgeting issues. And so they were able to say, well, we're not going to vote on, 20 new 3D printers when we actually need a reading program in our school because our kids can't read. And so seeing how they're taking that information and using that to kind of hold the district that they have accountable or hold a school that they're a part of accountable was a really interesting thing for me. When you can't pick, when you can't move, when you can't go, when you're stuck where you are, you have to work with what you have. And part of that is actually taking that information and holding those people in charge in those spaces accountable.
One thing you make clear also in your stories is that more data doesn't always mean better instruction or better student learning. For reporters who may be covering this issue, what are some potential red flags here of a district data policy that maybe is falling short?
Generally speaking, there is this idea of how data is cleaned. And that's a very, very big issue for people in a sense that data is always seen as this objective tool, but you don't know how objective it is because it's also being cleaned. And there's a lot of use of visualizations in that data. And sometimes when data is being cleaned or removed, taking out data points that obscure whatever is going on, that can also be a non-objective act, right? Whoever is cleaning that data has an idea of the narrative they want to display to decision makers, and they're going to clean that data in a way that reinforces sometimes their preconceived narratives. And so thinking about how the data is cleaned, how things are calculated is really key for data stories, and it's actually really hard to go through, and it's time consuming. Particularly with personalized learning, I think a big red flag for me is always ambiguous accountability. One thing that school districts are doing a lot of is trying to find other ways to think about accountability as opposed to test scores. I personally am not against the idea of thinking about other things besides test scores, but at the same time, a lot of that moving away from test scores leads you to more ambiguous calculations of what improvement looks like, and to the point in some places where I've seen people start to talk about accountability based on sensors and shoes and all kinds of weird things that they're coming up with. And it actually isn't, there's no sense of accountability in that. So you can't even measure it effectively in a way that people or the public would understand. One of the things that I generally say with that is to ask the district officials or ask school officials how they're measuring how successful what they're doing is, and then hold them to the bar that they set for themselves.
Jenny, you gave a great story suggestion already, which is to check district job boards to see what kind of vacancies they're trying to fill. What's another story idea for a local reporter who may want to cover student data?
I definitely think digging a little bit deeper into how things are being calculated is a really big story. I think that what people are leaving out and what people are putting in, that's a hard one to make sexy in a sense that is all about how things are put together, and it's also a question of objectivity. But there's a lot of things hidden in the data, especially the way they're calculating these college readiness scores. It's so bizarre sometimes. And so if you look at the calculations, you're like, wait, it's all obscured, and you'll look in places and you'll see where reading scores have gone down, but somehow college readiness has gone up. And it's directly tied to how they're calculating those scores. I would also definitely think about the decisions that are being made through data. I think that's really important, how much power those data people have. Do they have their own intentions as to what interpretations they're giving to school decision makers? How much power does the data office have? What does the data office even look like? Who's actually calculating the data? And what kind of accountability are they using for that? Strong technology and data stories are also strong human stories. And so those things are always married. And I think that's the best way to kind of tell the story of tech and innovation in schools, is focus on the humans that it's impacting.
Jenny Abamu is an education technology reporter at EdSurge and joined us from her office in Washington, D.C. Jenny, thanks for making time for EWA Radio.
Thank you so much, Emily.
And thank you, everybody. That wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to know more about, drop us a line at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.